Welcome to a very important discussion about addiction. And addiction is a big deal. And I'm here to talk about something that might be not so popular about addiction. That it's not a disease, that it is something that you can control, and that you need to take responsibility for it. And it's addiction is not a diagnosis, and dopamine has nothing to do with it. Survival has nothing to do with it. And it's not an impulse control problem. It's not out of your control. And I'm a clinical psychologist. I'm a PhD. I've been trained. I've worked in many hospitals. I worked specifically with substance abusing homeless veterans for years. And I've seen and heard it all. And it's a serious topic. I really didn't want to talk about all this because what I'm saying is going to be very unpopular with many people, and a lot of people I respect are going to disagree with me and probably change their opinion about me. I guess I have a little bit of Ravenclaw in me, where I'm more interested in the truth than the beginning. There is a difference between a disease, a disorder, and a syndrome. A condition is a catch-all for something that's like a state of health that interferes with normal feelings of well-being. It's a generalized term. Addiction is not a disease. So if you're watching somebody on YouTube and being like, I'm going to quote a journal, hard stop, it's a disease and it's not your fault. Well, that's not true. A disease is a medical condition with a known cause that affects how your body functions, and physiological or biological illnesses have this identifiable cause. If it's malaria, that means you got bit by like a mosquito or something, a parasite got in you, and now it's chomping away on your red blood cells. And blood's really important. If you have tuberculosis, that means there's the bacteria in there. It's ripping up your lungs, and breathing's really important. That's a disease. I should insert Mitch Hedberg here. He's a thing about how addiction is the only disease you can get yelled at for having.
Otto, you're an alcoholic. Damn it, Otto, you have lupus. One of those two doesn't sound right.
Anyway, so a disease is a medical condition that disrupts how your body functions, right? Not how that's different than a disorder. I'll go over a disorder in a second. It has a known and identifiable cause. There's usually a course of treatment, hopefully, and you can use things like antibiotics for it. You can use imaging. You can take an X-ray. You can see it. A disorder is not like that. Now, substance abuse is a disorder. In this book here, the DSM, this is the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual for mental disorders. And, this is what psychiatrists use to classify and identify your diagnosis. And they go out of their way to say that there's no such thing as addiction in this book. Addiction is just a word we use. It has no meaning. It is not a diagnosis. You will not find a diagnosis of addiction in here. And yes, there is a substance use disorder, which means a disorder is something that disrupts normal bodily function and structure, and it's a group of symptoms that disrupt bodily functions, but you can't X-ray it, right? And you can control it, but basically it's a disruption of normal bodily structure and functioning. And people will pull out those little visuals of like brain scans, and I say warning, brain scan, don't trust them unless you're like a real unless you're a real researcher in a lab coat, and you're not going to do a TED talk, and you're not going to get likes, or you don't want attention, or you don't have a book to sell. Don't trust any of those people. But anyway, so with the brain scans, they can say, oh, look, your mind is being affected by these substances, and it's changing your chemistry. Well, yeah, but I mean, so does meditation, and meditation will change your neural circuitry. But that was not a disorder. A disorder is something that disrupts the function. And just because you're using substances doesn't mean the brain isn't doing exactly what it's supposed to do when you do this to it. Opioids, which is different than dopamine, by the way. Don't make that mistake. I'll cover that too. There's this big lie about dopamine receptors and all that stuff like that. And I'm going to clarify that for you, because people think that dopamine is like a feel-good drug. It's not. It's a neurotransmitter, and you're really going to get a lot of education out of it. What's really funny is I have a video on like opening a bag with my bunny therapy t-shirts, which you can buy. Go to my Patreon. I just need 18 more of you to like sign up, and then I can just put a merch store on there, or you can contact me and get your own. But I have a video of me opening the bag of getting my delivery of bunny therapy t-shirts. I made this one personally, by the way. But it had like 8,000 views. And then I come along and I put that affects your body, and it's a biological or a physiological illness that has identifiable cause, hopefully a course of treatment. And but we can point to it and say, that's the problem, right? A disorder is a disruption of normal bodily structures or functions, and that's what addiction is. It's substance use disorder in the DSM. And so what makes it a substance use disorder? And you need more of it to get drunk. And if you don't use more, then it doesn't work as good. And then there's withdrawal. Now, notice that most of this is like behavioral stuff, like how it affects your family, how it affects your work, how it affects your life, how it affects your problems. And it doesn't say like it's killing you, which it can over time. Or if you suddenly withdraw from it. But basically, what makes a substance use a disorder is that the fact that it screws up your life, not that it screws up your life like a disease, like getting cancer. That's different, isn't it? Right? All right. So, and a syndrome is just a collection of symptoms, and nobody seems to there's no kind of like thread running through it. It's just like, we've got this syndrome, and it's typified by a set of characteristics. But that's different than a disorder, and a disorder is different than a disease. And substance addiction is not a disease, and it's not a diagnosis. And now, is it a problem with impulse control, like OCD, like where you have compulsions and stuff like that? There's a thing called impulse control disorder. You're not going to find it in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, but they'll mention it. No, you can. You can. You can control your behaviors. There's a thing in your brain called the central sulcus and the precentral gyrus, and it controls what you do. Like if I want to raise my finger, go like this, I can do that, right? Because I have free will and choice to do that. Now, there was this interesting research, I think from the late 80s, where a guy was able to detect that there was like activity in your brain that preceded the motion. So when I decided to do this, there was actually a little part of my brain just outside of consciousness that said, you're going to wiggle your finger, right? So that has implications. You can control it. If you know what's really hard about not drinking? Not drinking. It's really hard about not smoking. And I'll get to why. Now, people are going to try and pull some magic tricks over you and say like people who are neurologists, especially, or neurobiologists, especially, they start talking to you like you are a student and not a human being. They don't know how to communicate. And so hopefully I can do that. Now, some guy expert at YouTube said that like there's two general audiences. There's the older audience that wants to know that you know what you're talking about, that you're a trusted source of information. And then there's the younger crowd that want to make sure that you're relatable, that you can talk to them. Hopefully I do that. Hopefully you can see that I have authority. I am licensed by the state. I have experience. I have an education. I have a degree. I know what I'm talking about, lives or whatever it is, but they're not telling you the truth. Don't urinate on my extremity, my lower extremity, and tell me it's precipitation. You know what I mean? Don't you dare tell me there's precipitation when I know it's urination. And so they'll say like, oh, it happens. People get addicted, and then the part of the brain that's tied to survival gets tied to like the part of the brain that's like connected to like the substance use, and they feel like they're gonna die if they don't use the thing. You know what? Spare me. They are perfectly capable of not using it. They're not gonna die. There's a difference between feelings. You have the ability to pick up a can of beer. Where is it? I was gonna make coq au vin. Coq au vin. Van, V-I-N, is the same word as vine in English. Vine, like a vine, where grapes come from. And vin is the French way of saying it. Coq au vin literally means the male chicken to the wine. And it's a delicious dish. And it's a lot of fun to make using cognac. And I got Hennessy, and I started doing research on Hennessy, and there's this one guy who looked at the history of Black people that goes way back. This is not a hip hop thing. This goes back to like high culture, back like around World War I, when a lot of the U.S. troops went over to France and stuff like that. Is this stuff French? I think it is. Yeah, it is French. See? Like there's history in this. And what you do is you start making the chicken, and at the end you pour in the cognac and you light it up, and there's a big fire. It's a lot of fun. Anyway, he's like, Black people love Hennessy, and there's a reason for that historically. But if I want to, I could pound this right now and be drunk as a skunk by the end of this video. But you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to use my precentral gyrus, and I'm going to pick this thing up and all the bags of chemicals in my brain. We're going to set this right back in the kitchen area. This is my kitchen area, right where it belongs, until I make the next delicious batch of food. So, okay, so there's the Hennessy. Okay. Now, there's this really interesting thing about the question of consciousness, and do we have a choice? And so they ask a really esoteric question, and they reduce it to like an easier question. So like, is neuronal activity, like brain cell actions, transduced into conscious awareness? And what that basically means, if I could just say it, is like, does like the stuff that your brain cells do become awareness and consciousness? Because there's some debate about that, and then you get the philosophers involved, and science comes from philosophy, by the way. You'll see my video where I've got like a little rubber band, because this philosophy got stretched so far that it eventually got specialized and then testable, and then it became a science like biology, right? But no one would argue that what brain cells do, if you don't have brain cells doing stuff, there is no consciousness. You have consciousness, you have free will, you've got a challenge. If you're struggling with addiction, or if you know somebody who's struggling with addiction, he says with air quotes, then you got your hands full. But there's a choice to be made. Now people will come up with this other stuff about survival and talk about dopamine and dopamine hits, and these people are well-intentioned and uninformed. Dopamine is a neurotransmitter. Okay, so serotonin is a neurotransmitter, right? These are things like, so you got one brain cell and you got another brain cell, and then they have like these little like finger-like things at the end, and there's like a little gap in between, and this one gets all excited, and maybe it's going to squirt some chemicals into this little gap. Maybe it won't. It depends on, like the calcium and the potassium and blah, blah, blah. And then if it does, then it goes over here and it gets into these little guys. And then this one gets the message from this one. And the little chemicals in between there are the neurotransmitters. Now, serotonin is a transmitter, and serotonin has a job, and it's not a sexy job. It's basically like, it handles things like mood and memory processing and sleep and thinking and stuff like that. But this is like a chemical that does that. And if people, do enough drugs and alcohol, then these things start getting disrupted, because what happens is like the little chemicals the things get tired after a while. That when they're squirting a whole lot, and then they have to suck it back up and hold on to it for the next message. Well, they get tired and they stop working. And then there's another neurotransmitter called dopamine. Now people will say like, oh, you do this thing, you get a dopamine hit. And what they're trying to do is confuse you into thinking that it's the same thing as an opiate. An opiate is like a chemical that your mind makes to kill pain. And so like if you start using things like heroin or opium, then your body says, hey, I don't need any of this stuff anymore, right? And so it stops making it. So as soon as you stop using the heroin or the opium, then you're in a world of pain. Now, if you just chill out under the right circumstances, everything will be fine. You'll return back to normal. But if you come back and your body isn't adjusted to like handling all this stuff again, and you do a whole bunch, well, then it puts you to sleep and you stop breathing and you die, right? So like that's what opiates do. And your brain makes them just fine all by themselves. And so now there's dopamine, which is a neurotransmitter. That's a chemical. You don't feel it. It's not a feel-good drug. It's not like Hennessy for the brain. It's not heroin. It's different. All it is it's a neurotransmitter that detects when you have pleasure. So how do you have pleasure? Well, I'm glad you asked. I'll address that, especially with sex, because sex is the most exciting a level of excitement that's not exactly pain, because pain and pleasure kind of have like, they diverge somewhere along the way, but it has to do with stimulation and excitement. And there is dopamine is here's like a little view of like the brain and different chunks of it. Neuroanatomists and researchers, neurology and neurologists, they'll get excited by that because they know exactly what it's talking about. Now let's look at it in color. See the orange part? Let's see if I can get it up here. The orange part, that is the pathway for serotonin. It's a neurotransmitter. Does it feel good? No. The blue stuff, that's dopamine. Those are dopamine pathways. And do they feel good? No. But they're associated with pleasure. And dopamine is more, and so the dopamine is going to figure out the stuff that you like, but it doesn't like anything. It just wants it. Like if you do something pleasurable, the dopamine's going to be like, whoa, that thing. Do that thing because that will bring you pleasure. And usually pleasure can be good, right? Like, meaning it can be, it can get you motivated. That's what I mean by good. It can give you pleasure and euphoria. Do you know what euphoria is? It's like, I feel so pleasure. I feel just this amazing sense of well-being. And it also has to do with fine-tuning motor functions, like playing an instrument or something like that. It has to do with compulsions, like being compelled to do stuff, and perseveration, doing the same thing over and over again. So you can sort of see how people will come up with an argument that like, oh, you did this thing and you got a shot of dopamine. And then what the message that the average person gets is like, oh, you felt great because of the dopamine. No, the dopamine is just a neurotransmitter that helps you motivate, identify things that feel pleasurable and euphoric, and redoing that over again, and figuring out how to do it and that kind of thing. So I took a psychobio class at NYU, and this one guy, he was doing research on cocaine, and it's really interesting. So like, I hope that everybody gets to this point of the video, because there's this thing called the nucleus accumbens, and it's it's this little chunky poo right here, right there, somewhere right there. Yeah, that's the nucleus accumbens. See, nucleus accumbens. And like, imagine like a primitive version of humans, like trying to like eat and survive. And like, again, well-meaning intended people will say your brain is there to keep you alive. Well, yeah, but it's also there to keep you alive so that you pass on your genes, so you have sex, right? Like, and you'll notice that other organisms that don't have pleasure reproduce themselves. Okay, so imagine like you're a human being a long time ago, and you work all day. And you finally get some food because there's no grocery store, there's no convenience store, there's no 7-Eleven. And you get that food and you take that first bite. For me, it was an orange in Orange County, California. I went for this long walk in the hot sun, and there's this place where you can put money in on the honor system and get a bag of oranges from the old orange grove trees. And I sat down in a strawberry field, and I opened up that orange and I tasted it, and I had this euphoria, this like huge sensory experience. And like, I just felt like I was having sex, right? And it turns out that when you do this in the nucleus accumbens, right over here, you get the dopamine gets in there and says, that was pleasurable. We want that, right? And then the same thing happens if you have an orgasm where you work really hard to like mate with somebody, and then you finally have that orgasm, and you get the same exact thing. The same exact thing happens when you smoke a cigarette, and the same exact thing happens when you used cocaine. And so the professor said something I'll never forget. He said, so drug use is a caricature for hard work, and I will say pro-social hard work, like working hard to procure food, to get a relationship, to have sex, and then pass on your genes, right? So like, there's different kinds of addictions, right? There's like, it's not just about like addiction. It's not just like about, opiums and heroines and alcohol and cigarettes and stuff. There's gambling addictions and shopping addictions, and flicking through your phone, things that get in the way of your life, right? And they have like this weird effect on your mind, and the dopamine pathways start picking up on this. And pretty soon you're like, I want that. The dopamine doesn't mean you like it, right? But what's really interesting is that like when people do cocaine, their experience changes from transforming a wish into euphoria at the same time. So imagine wishing and it happens. You feel euphoric and pleasure like you're having sex. There's a reason why lots of times, people don't know this, but but the cocaine and the sex is often paired together for a reason. And imagine like saying, I want sex, and feeling like you're having an orgasm. That's what it's like to be using cocaine. I mean, people say it's not a moral failure. It's not a moral failure. Well, it is a failure. It's a failure to live effectively. But if you are perfectly at peace with all of that, and then it's not really a problem for you, then, good for you, but it's going to catch up with you sooner or later. But is it a moral failure? A moral failure is a personal value, and I don't care what your personal values are. So I'm not going to say it's a moral failure. That's like, that's like front loading it. It's not a penguin. Well, I didn't say it was a penguin, right? Like it's not a moral failure. I don't know what your morals are. I don't care. Right? It's not a moral failure, but it is a failure to live an effective life. And you're probably like this. And I'm like, you what? You relapsed? This will kill you. And you relapsed? Don't do that. And you have every power not to do that, but they do it anyway. And it's serious and it's sad. It's really sad because I guarantee you find someone with addiction, there's something wrong. Something wrong, usually with their memories. Yeah, some people are just, psychopaths and stuff like that. But most of the time, something really terrible happened to them. Is like these little beautiful babies. Sometimes I see little beautiful babies being carted around town. And I've met so many people that were once beautiful babies and turned into these like addiction kind of, terrible stories. And I thought, man, at one point that baby was loved and all that. And, if you don't stimulate a baby, it doesn't develop. And we need stimulation. And the first stimulation, this comes from a journal. The details are here. Anyway, it's from How Does Our Brain Generate Sexual Pleasure by Komisaruk and Rodriguez del Cerro, 2021, October 13, 33, 602 to 611. It's a wonderful article. And here they are talking about chunks of the brain, and then they get into that in its most fundamental form, in our earliest developmental physical contact with our mother is everything. The loving, the caressing touch, the sound, the odor, everything is comforting and stimulating. And the brain pleasure pathways, the dopamine identifies it. And then later on we get it when we get a text message from someone that loves us, or from smoking or eating or drinking or having sex or getting a rush. These are substitutes for that early stuff. And so let me go over this real quick just to make sure that I've got everything in here. We're at 51 minutes, and I know it's way too long and nobody wants to listen to me very long. I feel sorry for you. You're going to see that thumbnail, and then this is what you get. So the message is, it's not a disease. It's not a diagnosis. Don't urinate on my lower extremity. Call it precipitation. Don't precipitate. Don't urinate and tell me it's a precipitation. And dopamine, that's a misunderstood, misused term. Moral failure. Your morals are up to you, man. Whatever you want to do is fine. I'm not saying that that's the failure. The failure is to stop driving everybody nuts by giving up the thing that brings you pleasure, and talk about the worst thing that ever happened, and then you stand a chance. But who wants to do that? Nobody. That's why it's such a failure to try and treat people that do these things. And the addiction is more than just drugs and alcohol. It's your shopping, it's your gambling, it's your video games. You know what it is that you're doing, and you have the ability to stop it. Ooh, isn't that scary? And we've come into a world where we shame the shaming, that we give people a pass. Oh, he was in the throes of addiction, or Your Honor, et cetera, et cetera. We've taken the shame out of it. You know what? These people are already shamed. They know they're shameful. And what are you going to do? Dance around it and not tell them that what you're doing is shameful and you need to cut it out? Instead of saying, well, that's part of the process. It's a disease. BS. You can stop. It ain't easy, but you could stop. Now, you can do it. And I think I've covered pretty much everything that I want to cover. Yes, there are neural pathways, right? But it's not destiny. You have free will. And the philosophers can play with that all they want. But at the end of the day, people are suffering. Pain in life is inevitable. Suffering is everything you put on top of it. And people who get into addiction are doing just that. It's a huge form of avoidance. And like that article said, nobody would disagree with the idea that without neural functioning, there would be no consciousness. It's a debate on whether or not the bags of chemicals in your brain make you conscious, but you are conscious. Even if there's an unconscious, and I'm a big Freud guy, and I'll do any psychotherapy that works. But there is such thing as an unconscious, and you can have access to it. Look at my other video with the early Freud letter and the access and accessing the inaccessible by repeated acts of mindfulness to become aware and to be open and to do what the 12 steps does, which is surrender, end the struggle. Go ahead and live your life. Okay. Being a Ravenclaw and interested in the truth. I just said a lot. I didn't say it well. Hopefully it was relatable. And, if I was more Gryffindor, I would say, okay, be brave and like and subscribe. Go to my Patreon. Support my mission to spread psychology and the truth to everyone, everywhere. A Ravenclaw, I don't think, would say that. A Hufflepuff would be like, oh, it's nice. I hope you enjoyed it. But I'm Ravenclaw. But the Gryffindor in me says, please, like and subscribe. Go to my Patreon. Get yourself a Bunny Therapy t-shirt where he's doing the thinking and he's doing the meditation. He's bringing awareness to the painful memories. This bunny is not addicted. It's not diseased or have a disorder or a syndrome. It's just like you and me, full of problems and challenges in living. And yes, there's war, and yes, there's cancer. But almost always, the world is safe. And almost always, you have a choice in what happens next. That's a good place to stop. Like and subscribe. Go to my Patreon. Get a bunny t-shirt.